Hey everybody, welcome to Writing for Media. Good to see you. Of course, this is not live. This is actually a tape that you'll be watching probably somewhere between maybe 45, 50 minutes and an hour twice each week. Usually they don't both run that long, but this is the class where we'll learn how to write for the media. And that's basically any kind of platform involves any kind of news media, whether it's the straight old-fashioned newspapers that are printed out from dead trees, or just what we see on the internet, what we see in the New York Times, what we see maybe just like in your local Times, that sort of thing. NJ.com is one in New Jersey that's popular. I realize we'll probably maybe have some international students, so you'll have kind of be familiar with what's in the Rutgers area. But I am Tom Davis. I am a longtime veteran of this business. I Just to kind of give you some background on myself a little bit. Um, I first started writing professionally for the media when I was 16, not to brag, but it was basically for a local weekly newspaper in my hometown of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, Jersey Shore. Jersey Shore. Rah. Um, anyway, the occasionally I get distracted by a text from my wife. But anyway, sorry. Um, so I have been I taught I was actually essentially just a professional for a long time, and I worked for newspapers. I would like to say I worked for the worst paper in America, which was the Delaware State News. Um, we actually printed stuff that was awful and libelous, not myself personally, but we had a sound off column that this was pre-internet days that read like some of the troll comments that you see like on Twitter or X, only they were printed in a newspaper. Um, and but I've also worked some really good publications, really good outlets. Where I work right now is actually an insurance trade publication. Yes, insurance. But despite what's going on with healthcare, there is some things that are happening in insurance that are actually rather cutting edge compared to other places. Not defending the industry, but and I'm not talking about healthcare industry either. I'm talking about like property, casualty, that sort of thing. They deal with climate change and that sort of thing. But anyway, I actually am an editor of a magazine now called Best Review. I also worked for the Bergen Record in Northern New Jersey, and also Patch.com. I was the New Jersey editor. But I was hired here a long, long time ago. First for a semester, an unpaying position, then ever since September 2004 as a paid adjunct professor, or really it's part-time lecturer. Um, so I mean, you may think I'm old. I am old. I'm 59 years old, but I'm trying to basically try to stay updated with everything that's going on. Not just try to, but I am. And in fact, I was one of the first people in my newspaper in the Bergen Record 20 years ago to actually like do what they called mobile journalism, essentially work from a laptop and just cover what was happening in real time. That was seen as unheard of at the time. So many of you probably watching this were probably maybe like two or three at the time, maybe if even if that. But um, so as I've gone along, I've tried to basically try to teach, and adjust and change with the times. Because um, news is read in so much different ways right now, and I actually almost prefer the way news is presented now. I mean, there's a lot to say that about news media. It's bad, but there's also a lot to say it's good. I actually prefer in a lot of ways, for example, the social media presentation of news. I mean, I may not be a fan of the way Twitter/X has transformed or changed or evolved in the last couple of years, but I still actually prefer reading a lot of my news that way. But despite those changes and all those things, many of the things are still remain the same, and that is the way news story is written. Um, what I teach in this class is basically what goes behind that, how to structure it, how to essentially like report for it, interview for it. In fact, we do have a book to read, and some of the first chapters I'm going to ask you to read are actually deal with just that, just how to put that story together and how to interview people for that or secure information, which doesn't always come from people, it may come from the internet itself for a story, a good, well put together news story. Okay. Big difference between this class and the classes I normally teach, and this is, I believe, the fourth summer in a row I've taught. I've also taught other summers. I didn't teach summer from like 2017 to about 2021 or two, but I've been teaching writing for media in the summer times, and it's different than a lot different than the fall and winter, fall and spring, because we have to do it under such a condensed format. We're basically done by the 4th of July, essentially. And that's not a lot of time. Okay. I'm used to teaching from uh, probably halfway to near the end of January all the way to the beginning of May. Okay. Which is about what, 2.5 months, 3.5 months. So this is a month and a half. So what I try to do is try to get things going and move things quickly. One thing I do is, as I'll talk to you, is that I do these videotapes, which are a much watch. I realize that they don't come with all the bells and whistles and all that stuff, but I do try to make it as maybe as entertaining as possible. But the chief thing is here is education, which can be presented in an entertaining way. Um, it's not always the easiest thing to actually just kind of talk and have no audience in front of you to talk to. I mean, I know you're out there, but um, sometimes I might actually look at the number of views on the YouTube and I'll be like, oh, cool, look at that. There's like 50 views on it. Or even though there's like 20 kids in the class, or there's even like 25, I'll be excited. But if I see like 10 views on it, I'll be like, oh boy, okay, that's not good. But the videos are a must watch, okay? The book is a must read, even though you're not tested on the book, and I'll get into that. But there's no way for me to, other way for me to get to you other than actually emailing you or sending out stuff on the Canvas platform to get information to you. This is how it's taught. This is how it has to be done, and you have to watch. Okay. Of course, I can't like keep tabs on you. I don't have like any kind of spy satellites or anything like that that like keep tabs on you to make sure you're watching or not. But that's up to you, really. Okay. You're all adults, and that's the way it is. Okay. So, that was a lot about basically why we do this, or what we do in this class. I'll get more specific when we look at the syllabus and that sort of thing. But like I said, a lot of what we teach in this class is basically how to put together a news story. And now that that's presented is, like I said, it's presented on a website, it's presented on the Dead Tree newspaper, it's presented in a television news program. And even like some of the things I mentioned in social media, like your Facebooks and your Instagrams and your X's and your Twitters and all that stuff. I mean, it's still kind of presented in a newsy way. And the way news is presented, it's almost like when you write a story, it's almost like an upside down story. It's basically you have essentially the most important stuff is written first in a news story. If it's a one paragraph news story like we see like on Twitter, then that has to be about the most important thing. It can't be not about, it can only be one thing. It's got to be the most important thing, and that's got to be written in that sentence. If you have 10 sentences in your story, and the first sentence really has to be about the most important thing, and not just the most important thing, but basically what this story is about. And basically telling you, summarize essentially what the story is about. Um, giving you some sort of clue or idea that what you're about to read, because the idea is that actually you're supposed to draw you in to the story. You're supposed to be much like what's done in advertising, that sort of thing, whether it's a jingle or a picture or whatever else. There's a way, there is like kind of like some sort of like advertising kind of public relations kind of like aspect of journalism that we're trying to like draw you into the story and sell you on an idea and then essentially sell you on a story. And that's why they like when we try to sell you, the first thing we talk to you about is going to be, it's got to be something that's got to be catchy and written in a way that basically gives you some idea what the story is all about. Okay. Um, Okay. So actually, I can give you an idea here when now that I'm actually going to split the screen here. But first, I want to actually do something first. Okay. Sometimes I have to admit I kind of act a little random. So apologize for that in advance. Okay. All right, let me just share the screen here. Okay. Oh boy. Yeah, okay. Please. Hold on one second. It's giving me a little bit of a problem with the sharing of the screen. So I'm not really sure why. Um, okay. Okay. So let's try it again. Um, there we go. Okay. I don't know. I just had a anyway, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what this is doing, but anyway. Okay, hopefully it's capturing everything here that's here. Okay. So yeah, I'm actually like this is actually one of the examples of things that you see I'm a Knicks fan, so hey, the Knicks are winning. That's great, at least at the time of this recording. So let's hope that keeps going. All right, so everything kind of operates first of all out of the Canvas website. Okay, this is the student view of it. And but what I want to do first show you first is actually essentially like how a news story maybe typically differs from like what you've been writing essentially in expository writing or whatever the classes are called now. They're essentially like where you learn how to write in general. You're taught to learn essentially things along the lines of like essays where you have essentially like a hypothesis. You might even have like a thesis statement, okay? And then and you might have essentially something along the lines of like, a body and a conclusion, okay? Well, a news story is different from that because a lot of times in those types of stories, these are really the most important parts of the stories. Is basically the body gives you the guts of of the essay you're writing, and the conclusion essentially gives you essentially like the idea of what the story's about and what you're concluding. Well, to be honest with you, it's kind of like shifted around a bit. Essentially, your conclusion is like really your lead. What you're concluding that the story is about, the overall theme is there, and essentially sum upping the hypothesis. And then there's a body. Okay, I can give you a better way of basically saying, and that is the first most important thing is identified, summing up the story. That's what comes first, and then as kind of like I'll be talking more about this as we go along. The so-called body of the story basically answers questions left by the lead because the lead's not going to answer every question of the story. It's going to be something about maybe it's a car crash or something like that. Or and then what are the things you're going to want to find out about a car crash? People get hurt. Um, who did it? Is anybody going to be punished for it? Um, you go through these steps of essentially like wanting to know information and how it led to that. You're also going to want to know, obviously, like I hate to say it, but not to be callous, but you want to know basically, is it going to hold up traffic and things like that. I mean, everybody cares about that. Those are the who, the what, the where, why, when, and how questions, essentially. And then there's no conclusion. You know why? Because everything is concluded up here. Okay. And you'll see that in your paper, especially in the early going. You'll see like me saying no conclusions, because essentially a news story just kind of ends. It just kind of dwindles out. Okay, we'll be getting into that. It's something that's called the inverted pyramid, where essentially it's almost like an upside down triangle, where the fat part of the triangle is the top of the story, and that identifies the most important thing, and then the tiny part of the triangle identifies the least important thing. So it actually essentially goes in that kind of order in terms of what's written. The most important thing down to the least important thing. Okay. All right. And then I was going to show you a little bit of like, I mean, it's not always probably a good idea to show you essentially like news stories from the New York Times because essentially it's like it is a basically a kind of a higher level of writing, and they will be the first to tell you that. There was a breaking news story today. And those are usually like the best stories to read in terms of like their simplicity and to see like the kind of structure that's basically there. There's no frills in a news story. There's no fluffy adjectives or something like that. It's just basically everything that's fact, fact, fact. You're writing facts, okay? Some stories are a little more creative than others. That's when you get into like your feature stories where they maybe like do like personal interviews and stuff like that. But when you have somebody who was a Trump administration official who was resigning, that's going to be written in kind of a straightforward, flat format. Okay. And I mean, the first thing you're going to want to know is who's resigning, obviously. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, pretty big position, especially now, like with what's going on in Iran and everything else, it's going to be somebody who's going to probably be weigh in on basically the policy that's going into that. She's also been known to oppose like foreign wars and things like that. So it's been a good big question as how she feels about things, you know. So the director of national intelligence submitted a letter of resignation to basically resign to President Trump on Friday, saying that she was stepping away to support her husband until after he recently was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer. Um, okay, so I mean that's really horrible news. You feel maybe bad for her and sad for her and her husband, obviously. But it is important news because it basically shakes up the administration a little bit. They've had other resignations, that sort of thing. Then you're gonna probably want to know a little bit about like it goes in a little bit of the why already, why she's doing it. But who is she? You know, like what sort of like impact does she have actually on the administration, especially with everything that's going on? The departure will bring an end to Miss Gabbard's rocky tenure, and what will this mean? Is actually usually the first question that's answered in a news story is what kind of impact will this have? What does this mean? So Rocky tenure overseeing 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, not just the CIA. She had been largely sidelined by the White House on significant national security issues, including Iran and Venezuela, because you don't normally oppose those sorts of things, foreign intervention. She will remain in her post as the nation's intelligence chief until June 30th. Okay, and then there's a quote from her, a really long quote. Um, then it goes into like a bit of maybe like her basically it goes into basically Trump like talking about like her. Then it talks about like some of the things that she's done in the past in the background. I mean, there's really not a lot of like, despite her long enough quote here and everything, there's not a ton of information basically coming out about why she's leaving. There is a letter that's presented here. Um, Okay. But it's basically, it goes into a lot of background about like what she did, the fact that she ran for president. She was kind of a conservative Democrat who basically may even become a Republican for all I know. Um, so anyway, and then of course, like I said, this is also presented in different formats, different platforms. So, basically the same, the television news media presents things almost basically the same way with as the digital news media does, or as the traditional media does, like New York Times, um, newspaper media. Um, and you'll see that actually when I show you this, it'll be presented much the way I just showed you before with that New York Times story.
We are following some breaking news out of Washington. The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, announcing she is resigning. White House correspondent Libby Dean is live there in Washington with the very latest details, Libby.
Another top Trump official, Nicole, on the way out, director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She's resigning after her husband, Abraham, was recently diagnosed with an extremely rare form of bone cancer. This all coming in her resignation letter that also states that will take effect on June 30th. Gabbard is the fourth cabinet official resigning in this year of Trump's term. Noem was the last one. You'll remember the first one, rather, the Homeland Security Secretary. Then we saw the Attorney General Pam Bondi. Lori Chavez, Durema Chavez, who is the labor secretary, and now Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi has been outspoken about and against rather of U.S. military action in the Middle East, and one of her deputies in March resigned in protest of the war. That was Joe Kent.
You can see it was very much, you can see it whenever they take like kind of pauses or that sort of thing. That usually means like they're moving on to a new paragraph. News paragraphs, by the way, are very small and short. If you look at actual news story, you can see there's actually like it's not written like a textbook. You can see there's actually like spaces in between these graphs. That's the idea is that it's supposed to kind of resemble like somebody giving you news on the street, or basically somebody having a conversation with you and revealing some news. And what they do is they kind of essentially take a pause after they give you, and then usually give you an opportunity to ask questions and things like that. And then, as if like you're telling somebody like somebody's boyfriend broke up with somebody or something like that, you're going to have questions while that conversation is going on. And the next paragraph gives you the answer. Then another paragraph gives you the answer. So you can see they're very similar. Essentially, their presentation is very straightforward. Basically all the news they had was that she was resigning because of her husband's illness. And then it goes into the background, essentially, about like what led to this. Okay. All right. This is just a podcast I was watching before. Let's go to like again where I was going to go before, and that is essentially is the Canvas website and what's on there. Also, I'll talk about the syllabus. Okay. And you actually already have a news story. First thing I should mention though is that please, and this is going to be kind of like I'm gonna write to you and basically say to you, please email me right away just to say hi, and so I have your email address to provide any other email addresses you're willing to share. Okay. Basically, and I would like to know basically, essentially, it's essential for us to be staying in contact with each other. Okay. Um, so, like I said, I mean, I'll do my best to present the information, all the information I can, and essentially in these lectures, these videotape lectures, but it's also important for you to ask questions too and know what's going on. Also important for me to like know where you are and basically meaning know how to get to you and get information to you when there's changes or additional things to say or whatever else or and especially like there could be a situation where I might have to like reschedule a lecture or something like that. So please, I mean, I'll be sending out a note also. It's like this is from last year. Basically, it says that to please send me that. Send me your email. Let me know. You email me, but also like send me an email. Okay. Um, all right. I did not include this, and I should have actually, because I done it in my other. If you can give me like 1 second here. Um. I have actually, I always put a note on here. Very important. Okay. And that is that there's no AI in this class. Now, this is also on the syllabus, and I guess for whatever reason, probably I know why this happened. I didn't put this on the first part of the website, and that is because of what happened last summer. Okay, so that's not what I want. If you could just give me 1 second. So I'm sorry if it was a little faux pas here. Actually, I did not put it here, actually. Okay. Well, it's actually not really on the website. Anyway, it's on the syllabus, but I'll show you. I make it very clear in this class that there is no AI in this class. Okay. No artificial intelligence usage. Okay. Um, I mean, I wasn't ready to show you the syllabus just yet, but this is on the syllabus. First order of business, I do not accept AI generated work, including use of Grammarly, because Grammarly now actually can write a story on its own, and that's like one of the things they tell you that they can do when you call up Grammarly, and that is essentially that they can write a story for you. Um, I make that very clear on the syllabus because here's the thing. I should make it very clear here actually too. But here's the thing. Last summer, I had a big problem with that. So it was not fun. I ended up, I'm not a big person on reporting people. Um, and, and, and I would rather much work it out with them and deal with it that way. But for whatever reason, um, it became like a big deal. All right. I am going to put it here actually. First order of business. Okay. So that's a little change. Okay. All right. Go to home. All right. And I'm actually going to put that in bold. I do not accept AI work. Okay. I had a bunch of students last year, and it's probably because logic. I mean, I almost could not blame them because it was almost like ripe for like me people to get away with it in this class, and that was I had a bunch of people just basically essentially where I would kind of like I had the reins a little bit loose on like what they could write and where they get their information and I admit I'm not gonna act like I'm like some big know-it-all or something like that, but and I know everything that's going on in people's lives, but the fact of the matter is that you know and I've been very pretty good about like detecting AI and that sort of thing, but the fact of the matter is that there were few people who basically thought they could get away with it, and um, it was so like I tell you, and I can't really give it away for obvious reasons, but there are some obvious ways of actually detecting AI in usage. I'm here to really kind of teach you how to write. I'm not here to basically teach you how to be like somebody who just copies stuff off of the internet. Okay. I mean, you could do that anytime. And I'll admit it. I'm not, probably not, I'm sure I don't have a perfect track record in catching people, but I mean, look, if you're going to go down that road, you risk it, okay? Because I have actually reported people, and while I'll say Rutgers isn't as severe in their penalizing as other places are, I will say that what happened to the people last year did affect their grades in a very negative way because it had kind of ripple effects where I found one person, for instance, who it was clearly obvious this person was using AI, and then I looked back at this person's previous stories and noticed that it was very much the same way. And through the discovery process, it was determined that AI was used, and you know, basically there was more than one F involved. Let's put it that way. And but even if you get like one F on an assignment, especially like in this kind of condensed kind of class schedule, that could affect like your entire grade. Because for me, I also consider it as a violation of the class participation grade. And so I essentially failed them for class participation. I mean, if you're going to essentially cheat, that's not good class participation. So, all right. So anyway, so just really a first note about that. uh, I mean, like I said, the syllabus essentially is the contract that basically tells you what is in this class and what is expected. But I also try to do some of that here too. This serves as a home base for providing assignments and things like that. Of course, when I provide you assignments, I let you know, essentially, make sure that you know. So, by basically whenever I send out any kind of like message or something like that, I do it not just as if I post an assignment or something like that, you'll know not just through the assignment post, but I'll send out an email as well as an announcement too. So, all right. So anyway, this is actually the first page. So this is Walk in Writing for Media, an introductory course offered by the Department of Journalism. This is again basically where we learn the basic news writing, essentially develop a strong foundation for writing for diverse forms of media. Whether it's a news story, even PR, public relations is considered that. Data journalism is a form of media where you basically rely on numbers and stuff like that, which we'll talk about. I write arts review, but I mean, we don't really get into like criticism or opinion writing. That's actually on a really higher level. And Bruiser, shh. And that's my dog, by the way. Say hi to my doggy. Hi, Bruiser. Bruiser, come here. Bruiser. Bruiser. Bruiser, come here. You gonna say hi? Say hi? Yeah. See, I gotta make this hour easy, right? Okay. All right. Um, Bruiser. Bruiser. Anyway, Bruiser, sit. Shh. My dog doesn't like visitors at the house. And hey, say hi. Say hi. And he's got his leash on so he doesn't bite the person who's over there. My daughter's friends over here. My daughter's transferring to Rutgers, by the way. Her name is Sorry, Anna Shea Davis. So, yeah, you're a good boy. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, um, so yeah, as I said, there is actually a course textbook is Writing for Media. Now, what I do is actually when I talk about this book, I actually present to you the online version of this book, and there's a few different online versions. I get it from something called Vital Source. And I actually already have some assignments assigned, which I'll get to when I show you the assignments list. Okay. But yeah, now the thing about that, just so you know, and I'll repeat this probably again, and that is, again, I don't actually test on reading. I feel like you're adults, and I feel like I'm not a big book guy. I mean, I do talk and teach from the book, but I also teach from outside the book, and I feel like um, that you basically it's much better to like kind of learn by like doing and that sort of thing than it is actually just reading from a bland gray textbook. So what I consider that book to do is writing and reporting for the media, 13th edition, and it has to be the 13th edition, by the way. That's required by the department. But what I consider that book to do essentially is a supplement, an augment, and reaffirm what I talk about. So that's what I expect you to do. And when I feel like I don't test on the reading because I feel like the actual assignments, and they're all writing assignments, and that's it. There's no quizzes. I used to do quizzes. I got rid of them, and I feel like they were a waste of time. But I feel like the book essentially kind of augments, reaffirms what I talk about in class. And I know when you're not doing any kind of the reading because all I have to do is look at the assignments. And because if you're not doing well, even though I've talked to you about certain things and taught you certain things, it means that you're A, either not listening to the lecture, B, not doing the readings, or C, both. So, so that's all I need to know. Those writings are essentially are the tests, those writing assignments. Okay. The Associated Press Style Guide, that is essentially is something you can also get online. And that essentially, basically, it's like the journalism Bible, essentially, or journalism dictionary. And what it does is it helps you not only like know terms and that sort of thing that are typically used in journalism, but also it teaches you like certain style. Journalism is about consistency and making sure that you have like a certain consistent style in the way things are written, way things are presented, like throughout the country. I hate to say, I mean, there's a lot of like creativity and there's a lot of like in writing in general and then even in news writing, but it's also like a little bit more rigid in style. It's really more about the substance over style. Okay. If you're using adjectives and things like that kind of go over the top and that sort of thing, that's not giving people news. It's really more about like straight news, hard facts. Okay. So and there's a certain consistency about it so that you know, what you're learning in New York is the same as what you would learn in North Dakota and you're reading in the same language. Okay. Or even another country, whatever. Um, so it's very important to stay consistent. There's things like, okay, so when I abbreviate somebody's like, let's say police title, like sergeant or colonel, lieutenant colonel, or something like that, how do I abbreviate it? And you want to make sure that that sort of thing is consistent. For instance, like if somebody's at the rank of sergeant and you're going to call them a sergeant in the story, you would put SGT period, abbreviation before their name, that sort of thing. Certain things like what sort of like when you actually like write a news story, how to identify a person. AP style, Associated Press style. Associated Press is like kind of like the worldwide news agency that basically reports on all things going on around the world. But anyway, they say that essentially you identify somebody first by both their names and on a second reference, with a couple exceptions. One exception being that maybe if the child is like a small kid or something, so it's kind of funny to call that person their last name. But otherwise, the second reference, third reference, fourth reference, future reference of a person in a news story, you identify them by their last name. Okay. All right. So those are the two books. Um, then we also have our assignments, and I have this in the student view right now. I suggest when you do this, you go show by type. It's much easier to look at things because then you can see those things are parceled out. And we have run writing assignment that's actually due right away. It's due on Friday. Um, and that's profile of somebody you know. Okay. So you need to pick somebody you know. It could be anybody. It could be a person. It could be a family member. I don't care. And you need to write about them and basically write about who they are and like, what they do. But mostly, and this is, news, the word news comes from this. It's the plural of the word new. Okay. So yeah, it's like that also usually means like breaking news, things like that, things that are new, it just happen, stuff like that. But new also means unique. Okay. So whenever you write about something, you want to try to like present the most unique angle possible. Okay. So this first assignment here that's posted, and basically, this is where you essentially submit your assignment. It's graded, and you start it and you submit it right here. Okay, and I give you essentially an example of of a previous story that worked. It was written like this, but anyway, it says please keep the. I typically ask for stories that are 500, 800 words. And you focus on what's unique and what's new, essentially new and unique about that person. Also, I mean, also you want to find out what's the latest thing about them too. But what makes them different from everybody else? Doesn't have to be the most unique thing in the world. Just basically what separates. It could be like, I like stories about, for instance, students that are taking on like a couple of jobs or something like that because they can't afford to pay this high tuition or something like that. I mean, you don't see that every day, you know? And how do they do that? How do they afford that? How do they afford the time? Somebody working that extra hard to like get things done. So yeah, that's actually like kind of unique and interesting to me. Okay. Maybe like a story about somebody your age or something like that who's, I'm talking about your age, I'm talking about like 20 or 21, 22, who basically is taking on like some sort of like skilled job that others aren't doing, like an internship or something like that. That's not something that's the most common thing in the world, for people who are at this level of the class. So yeah, so that's something that maybe you would want to focus on too. Let's see what Andrew N. Wrote about. Yeah, I wrote A. Anyway, Griffin Barnes, our junior at Rutgers University, is gaining notoriety in the greater New Brunswick area for his efforts to assist elderly residents with digital service. So, I mean, that's not a crack on people or anything like that, but basically, how often do people, including myself, get time to actually do volunteer work, and help out people, especially older people, that sort of thing. So that I thought was unique and interesting. It's very simple. You see, it's very simple in the way it's written. It's an active voice lead, which means passive voice is when the noun of the sentence or the subject is after the verb. Active voice is when the noun is before the verb. So it's Griffin Barnes is gaining notoriety. So it's usually noun verb construction is how these things are written. Okay. And this person is assisting essentially elderly residents with their digital services. And then maybe one of the questions you want to do is like, okay, well, what you want to answer is, what is he doing? Well, providing in-house services. He takes logistical hassle out of computer setup. And then I also say like, it's good that this is the journalism way of footnoting is he said, she said. So you want to try to work that into the story as some sort of form of attribution. Let people know that this is coming from somewhere. And of course, there's also direct quotes often in stories. You can like me to a painter, a plumber, a mechanic for computers. I'm going to call whatever they need. It's a nice, colorful quote. A lot of news stories actually paraphrasing what you get from the interview, more about like what he does. And there's a little bit about like why he does it here, um, how he does it. He promotes his services by passing flyers. See how it's very simple writing, very straightforward. Okay. All right, so that is going to be due on Friday, May 29th. Okay. So usually, typically, our assignments are going to be due on Fridays. Okay. And then we actually get a rewrite on that assignment. So that actually means that you actually get another chance at it. That's the best way to learn. You get another chance. It'll be in the syllabus too, but you get another chance to actually look at this and say like, how can I do this better based on my comments and criticism on the actual on the actual paper. And then, that new grade will replace the old one. Okay. All right. So yeah, the assignments will be listed here. And then you also have reading assignments, and then they're from the book. Chapters 3, 4, and 11 is the first one. And I ask you to read these every week, and they're due like every Monday. So you see, the first one is due June 1st. If you look at chapters 3, 4, and 11, They're very introductory kind of news writing style. Just basically give you some general sense of what we're looking for here. I'll talk more about that next lecture. Um, for language of news, and then 11 is interviewing, basically the very basics. How do you start? Well, you start by interviewing and getting information from people, that sort of thing. And when you do that when you actually talk to somebody, interview somebody, and I'll get more into this too. It's almost like it's weird because probably the most unnatural process of the journalism process, actually interviewing somebody. It's almost like a job interview, you know? It's not like the actual reading of a news story and how it's presented is like a conversation. But that's not how the information is obtained or secured. The information is obtained and secured through a kind of a clunky, kind of awkward kind of process of interviewing people in a very simplistic way where you basically, I like to say you start off with the macro ideas of actually asking questions like who are you, what do you do, what's your interest? And then you get to the micro. You find out what's through the interview process, what's unique and interesting about them, and you really focus on that part of the wheel, okay? And so it's like so much like, like a triangle, but you're doing it in a way where you're instead of like it's getting more acute in terms of your focus, okay, on the story, and you're doing that in your interviewing. You're almost writing your story. You can almost write your story in your head as you're interviewing the person. You ask the who, what, why, what questions, okay? Okay. Um, so what's next? We also have modules in here that basically show you what's being talked about each week. Okay, so you can see, like I said, we're on this condensed schedule, and actually, I actually put up two modules for each week, which I don't do in my other classes but because we're on this condensed format, I talk about, and we have two lectures a week. And again, those lectures again are going to come out on Mondays and Fridays. Only this one's different because it's coming out on Tuesday. Okay. So, because of the holiday. But anyway, so we have the course introduction, basically kind of gives you a general overview, like we're doing today, about what we're doing, class materials, what you're expected to have, that sort of thing. Okay. I also I don't go for a classic or traditional form of rubric here. My rubric essentially is very general and broad. When I first even heard of a rubric, because I've been teaching a long time, and I was like, a what? So, but I understand, I appreciate the fact that people expect that. So I provide what my form of rubric and grading is. I don't really get too much into the actual grading aspects of things until you actually do write something, because it's hard to actually really kind of talk about that unless I have like some sort of specific example from somebody. And it's much better to teach that on an individual basis. But I can tell you basically, I typically have 5 or 6 assignments, really six, essentially that will be due. And what I do is I actually like give your last assignments more weight than your first and middle assignments, okay? Because the idea here is that a lot of people walk into this class have never done any kind of journalism before. Let's just face it. Now it's become much more that way since now apparently this class has become like one of the almost required options, I guess, for like not just journalism majors, but everybody. I've heard. They want people to take some sort of writing class, so this is one of the options out there. So I've been getting a lot of people from the medical field, um, that sort of thing. I've been getting people from history. I've been getting people from other the not non-journalism students, so that's fine, that's great, and I've gotten a lot of good quality work from people. Anyway, so what I do is actually I give out, so let's say there's 6 assignments, which there probably will be. All right, so I say correct that's supposed to be an old statement. I apologize for that, but anyway, you have your first assignment, which is 10%. So anyway, what you have essentially is you have a 70% of your overall grade is your writing grade, okay? And then you have a 30% class participation grade. Now, I get this question often. For an asynchronous class, why would I have a class participation grade? Well, there are ways to actually participate that I expect people to participate. And one of those ways is I ask people to provide information through a discussion point sometimes to get information for a story or something. So that's one way I ask people to participate. Okay. I also care if you're actually asking questions and getting involved and that sort of thing, and you're not sure of things, especially on such a condensed schedule that you're trying to keep up with things. If I see it matters really, especially for people who might be doing a little poorly or maybe not as well as they could be. And if you're not asking questions and there's definitely like need for improvement or something like that, then I take that into account for that 30% of your overall grade. That you're not doing enough to really like better yourself or improve yourself. So I expect people to reach out and that sort of thing. Okay. And one of the also, I mean, basic things too, like I've had to chase after people just to get their email. So I fully expect people to actually provide me their email. That's like one of the most basic class participation things you can do. So, so then there's 70% is your writing grade. So, like I said, so what I do is I kind of scale it up a little bit. The first few are actually the same amount. And so out of that 70% of your writing grade, the first one is 10% of your writing grade. Okay, that's the profile assignment. The second one, which I'll talk about very soon, probably on Friday in the Friday lecture, that's also 10% of your writing grade. Okay. The third assignment is 10% of your writing grade. The fourth assignment is 10% of your writing grade. Then the second to last assignment is 20%. So it's twice as much as one of these individual assignments. And then the last one, the major assignment, that's the one I give out a little bit early and give you time to work on. That's where you're supposed to take all the stuff you've learned from this short semester and basically kind of put it together and use it for a news story that's a little more substantial than usual. Okay. Um, that's 40% of your writing grade. So that means it's four times as much as one of the individual early assignments. Okay. So you go from one, 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 two, four. Okay. So I care about the last thing more than the first thing. And that matters because a lot of people don't really get this until maybe a third or fourth assignment. So sometimes maybe not even to the last assignment. So um all right. So basically, look, this is a class where subjective oversight, okay? It's not a math class. So I essentially play your editor. I play your manager, your boss. And I give out the assignments and then I grade them and I expect them to be kind of written in a way that basically everybody can understand. What you have to understand is, and I'm sure if I ask people if you've ever done a writing, yeah, sorry, a current event project when you're like in third or fourth grade, a lot of you are going to raise your hands. And that's because, and what you have to do is you have to find some sort of news article that talks about what's going on in the world or something. Well, that's usually where news stories are written. They're usually written for people who are like in third or fourth grade and up. Okay. That's not a way of like dumbing down. It's just that it's trying to find a way to get information to everybody of all walks of life. You know, there's some newspapers like the New York Times and Washington, or sorry, the Wall Street Journal where that is up a little bit higher, maybe sixth or seventh grade or something. But the idea is for everybody to understand. Everybody, and you also want the person who maybe is the intellectual, or whatever, to not have to, or even not as intellectual, whatever, to basically not have to struggle with reading what's there. Just basically kind of easy reading, easily understanding what's being said. Okay. So I know this could be a little bit of a misnomer, but basically when I look for an A, I look for something that's like publishable and understandable. Understandable, I mean, doesn't mean that like, oh, you're running away where it's like, a ransom note or something like that, or like the words don't make sense or they're misspelled or blah, blah, blah. I mean, I can understand this news story from top to bottom. And it's focused. I have three tenets: accuracy, clarity, and focus. Okay. Accuracy meaning you need to get things right in a story, because otherwise you're going to have no credibility and everybody's going to shout fake news or whatever, and nobody's going to take you seriously. And then, clarity and focus, making sure that everything is understood, and focus, making sure that everything is focused on a line from the very top of the story to the bottom. Okay. That you're staying focused on the same topic. That's a common mistake that people make in their early going assignments is that they feel like they have to like tell every single, especially when you write a story about a person, they have to tell every single thing that happened to that person. But actually, what I'm looking for is just that unique quality of them, and for you to focus on that theme from the very top of the story to the bottom, and not go off on a tangent that could take the reader off focus and not answer all the questions that need to be answered. B plus and B are pretty similar, but it depends on the level of editing. Okay. And also, that's another thing I take into consideration in class participation. If you get a B plus and you don't rewrite it to an A, that's what the rewrites are for. They're basically to rewrite for a higher grade. And I give out a bunch of A's, I gotta tell you. So you write a B plus and you get a B plus and you don't write that to an A, then you're not participating. So that might affect your participation grade. But that's where maybe like it's not, maybe it's largely clear and focused, accurate. It requires some editing, maybe for in terms of clarity and focus. Okay, maybe even needs a little more information to make it more substantial. B is like that, but a little bit more and a little bit heavily that way. C plus and C essentially is like that's where we go into the unfocused mode, which is a common thing that happens with new writers, that's new news writers, that sort of thing, is that they have a hard time kind of like I said, staying on that kind of the same track. If it kind of goes off on focus, or maybe there's not enough information, but I do have an understanding at the very least of what the story is supposed to be about. Okay. Then I usually give them a C or C plus. D or an F, that's where I basically don't understand what the story is about. There's not enough information, and then that's where maybe it's inaccurate, which you should really gotta avoid the inaccuracies. That's where the AI falls into a lot, by the way. But I don't do that on the first draft. What I do is I give out two drafts. I give out the first draft, which is essentially um, just basically you write the story, and then I grade it, and then I give you I give you anything from a C or to above, which you can rewrite for a higher grade. And then you get an R if it's D or F level, which means that you have to rewrite it for a higher grade. I feel like this is not good enough to be like something that's really to be understandable. So that's when I give you an R instead of a D or an F, that you have to rewrite it. If it's really no better than it is on the rewrite than it was on the first, and I give you an R, you probably get a D or an F. Okay. The really we learn best by rewriting in this class. That's very important. Okay. Okay, so as we move along here, like I said, I use the discussion points sometimes as a way to like get people to essentially like, give information sometimes for a story prop topic I have. These are the modules that I have for the whole semester all the way down to the end. Okay. All right. Let me just go through my list of things here. Um, all right. Yeah, that's another thing also is that I please use a Microsoft Word. No PDFs, please. I get that's a common mistake. I guess there's a PDF option to like basically submit the story that way. Please don't do that. I can't grade. I typically grade on Microsoft Word using track changes. If you don't have Microsoft Word, and please go to a library or something and just basically submit it that way. I mean, I will even take it in an email or something like that before I'll take it in a PDF. Okay, I'll still put it in Microsoft Word. Okay. Um, all right. So please do that. Okay. So the syllabus, that's right here. Just basically download it or call it up. But I called it up here and I'm sorry, it's right here. Okay. So I have this more clearly marked right here. So here we go, 2026 syllabus. Okay, so here's another thing you should know also so the lectures will be posted and they're posted on YouTube actually. And what I do is I send you the link and that's actually on I'm sorry, I meant to do this. That's actually here under assignments. Let me go back to the student view. There's actually different sections to the actual assignment list here. So you have the written assignments, the readings, and actually it's not here yet, but the lectures actually become like another category, and you'll see them. This is actually lectures from last year. Oops, let me leave the student view. You can see they were in a different section right here. Usually come in this form. It says new lecture and then the date. Okay. They come in before 9 a.m. on Mondays and Fridays. Okay. So before 9 a.m. I had to go to like 9:05. Apologize in advance for that. But just so you know, that has actually happened. So, all right. So Monday and Friday before 9 a.m., please go look. Like I said, I'll send you an email showing you where it is and all that stuff. Okay. Anyway, so again, I've talked to you about this. It's also, I mentioned this in the academic integrity section because I had a big problem with that, especially last summer. Okay. So much of this I've already talked about. Introductory level course for students in journalism and in media studies program. This course meant to build a student skill set from the ground up over the course of the summer. Will be some grammar in this class, but that's something I really kind of expect you to kind of know going into this class. So, I mean, I mean, I do allow some leeway in that regard, but because I know that like, a lot of the your own education, maybe some of it even kind of sucked. So that's just the way it is. But anyway, I'm teaching you basically essentially the skills mostly as actually how to write a story. So students can spend the majority of their time working on key exercises and key writing assignments. Really, the key writing assignments. Okay. Um, identify and analyze characteristics of styles of media, print-based, digital, research, write, and edit content. I like to say that actually the first half of the semester, which is again not that very long for us, essentially is where we really learn about a lot of times people when they apply for journalism jobs, maybe some of you might be interested in doing that after this. They ask you, are you a better reporter or writer? And I didn't know this till like for a long time, but the better answer is reporter because a writer is not like really providing you necessarily. I mean, it's great if they're a great writer and reporter, right? If somebody who's just a writer is maybe just kind of feeding a lot of shit, So you want to like basically have somebody who actually like can provide you the facts, the information, provide the substance over the style, okay? Some of the best reporters in the world like can't write for crap, it's true, but they're edited in a way so that like their thoughts are clear and that sort of thing, and the reporting is really good, and they get information other people don't get, that sort of thing. Okay, so but the first half of the semester really concentrate on the writing end of things, just basically making sure you get the structure down of how a news story works. And the second half, we talk more about securing and obtaining that information and the reporting end of things. Okay. I always say don't buy the workbook because I always worry that there is some workbook out there. But so if there is one, don't buy it. Okay. Anyway, lectures and classes, students must be prepared. I say exercises, really exercises and discussions. Exercises might be like doing something like where I might ask you to provide some substance for a story, and I ask you instead because we can't interview each other like I do in my classes at school. I ask you to maybe contribute to a discussion point. Um, so anyway, so that's considered an exercise, that sort of thing. So that's like one of the things I expect people to do and participate in. Um, you know, and then the writing assignments can be attached to that. They could be you were asked people to contribute to a discussion point for a story, and then what you do is you write a story based on what's said in the discussion point, and it could be like a topic that deals with anything, okay, which we'll get into, like a topic, some sort of news topic, whether it's the weather or whatever. Um, all lectures will be recorded. Okay, so that's another thing too. I didn't say. Then I put them on YouTube, post on YouTube, but the links will be posted in the announcement section on Canvas, but also send them to you as an email, and it's also you should be on the thing that actually sends alerts to your devices and everything, saying that new assignment's been posted. Okay, by 9 a.m. every Monday and Friday except for this first one, which is it is it the 26th? Boy, I hope I got that right. Wait, 23, 24, 25. Yep, 26. Okay. Basically coming back from Florida, so if I sent a little like wackadoo, I'm sorry. My son just moved down there. It's more, and I went to visit him to see a Mets Marlins game. Anyway, in-class participation, again, I talked a little bit about this, 30%, and then the writing assignments are 70%. And then like I said, they're all presented actually on Canvas on the list that I provided before. Everyone was required to submit each assignment on time, make revisions according to the instructor's feedback. And I'll be getting into that timing thing in a bit, okay? Because that's actually very important, okay? That I had mentioned before. All right, so grading scale. An A grade will be rewarded to someone who fulfills the terms of the assignment. Then there's B plus and B, C and C plus. Assignments that fail to fulfill the terms of the assignment will receive a D or an F, really. Assignment does not approximate the terms of the assignment will receive an R for the assignment to be written, and failing that, an F. So if you get an R in an assignment, you don't submit it, you get an F. You don't submit the rewrite, you get an F, okay? So if you get an R, I made this a little more emphatic because people weren't getting it. If you get an R, you have to rewrite, or else it's an F. If you get a B, an A, if you get a B plus to C, you can rewrite for a higher grade, but it's not mandatory, just so you know. But I mean, if you're getting grades like I said, like a B and that sort of thing, and you're not rewriting, then you're not participating. So I'm sorry, maybe the greatest writer in the world, but and I don't make it mandatory, but make it mandatory for yourselves. Rewrite everything that you need to rewrite. Okay. You don't rewrite an A. Okay. Don't worry about that. I've had people who still don't understand that, but all right. So grading policies, there's late submission policy. Okay. So unless otherwise noted, all written assignments, discussion boards, whatever, projects, whatever, but really writing assignments, okay, are essentially identified and listed. The first drafts will not be accepted for more, okay, first drafts will not be accepted for more than 24 hours after a deadline. So if you don't submit if you don't submit your assignment, if you wait, so first of all, if you wait if you submit your assignment more than 24 hours after the timing, which is typically 11:59 on a Friday, if you submitted after the 11:59 on a Saturday, it's an F, okay? Because deadlines are important in journalism. Getting things done, beating the competition, that sort of thing. It's better to be right than be first, okay? So you want to make sure you got everything right first, okay? But if you're not on time either, then you lose also some credibility, and that is that people expect journalists to actually present their information as quickly as possible, and you're under the gun to like compete against people. And if you're like, there's two big news agencies out there that are always at war with each other, Bloomberg and Reuters. If Bloomberg comes out with a big story, which often happens, and Reuters doesn't have it, then people will click on Reuters or click on Bloomberg and not on Reuters, and Reuters loses a ton of business because of that. And then people come to rely on Bloomberg to be more reliable and on time. Okay. In the old days, when we had newspapers that just were delivered to your house, if you submitted something late or something like that, that would hold everything up, the whole production process, to the point where that it might even like the trucks might even get to people's delivering the newspaper to people's houses late, and then the paper would have to pay overtime and everything to the drivers and everything. So it's really bad to be late on a news story. Okay, what I do is I do provide some sort of 24-hour grace period. Anything submitted within that 24-hour period will be accepted, but with a lower grade, typically one grade lower. Okay, but if it's more than 24 hours late, then it's nixed. Okay. Then, like I do here with the modules, I present like what's essentially being presented. You can see some of these topics: news writing, AP style. This is the first half, deals more with the writing end of things. The second half, feature public relations, media ethics. This is more of like kind of the substance stuff, the reporting stuff that we deal with. Okay. Academic integrity. I made an important addition here. This is what's not allowed. Plagiarism, obviously, may take the following forms. Any use of artificial intelligence tools, including Grammarly, I've added this semester. Okay, or I actually added it during my fall and spring classes. So, I mean, we don't really deal with like emergencies, but if there's any kind of emergencies or anything like that's going on in your life or whatever, please just communicate with me. Let me know what's going on. If you don't, then we got a problem. Okay. I'm just saying. Okay. You gotta, things that come in late or whatever, then, I could be reasonable. Okay. You just let me know what's going on. I've had people who have had to deal with different things. So, all right. So that's it. I know that was a long one. So let me know. If you have any questions, please email me your email addresses, that sort of thing. Let me know what you typically use. I want to make sure I have all those on file because I should also tell you, that's how I send back your papers. I send them, I don't do it through Canvas. Don't pay attention to your grades on Canvas either. That's not how I grade. I showed you how I grade. Canvas has its own grading formulation that don't pay attention to that. I have my own. Just ask me. If you want to know how you're doing, I'll tell you. Okay. I'll even let you know like what grade range you're in or something like that. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks very much. And I'll see you on Friday. Okay.